Zimbabwe has set March 16th as the date for the referendum on the country's draft constitution. Finance Minister Tendai Biti recently told CNBC Africa that the country didn't have enough funds to hold the referendum. Earlier today, I spoke to Diprose Muchena, Deputy Director of the Open Society Initiative for Southern Africa. I began by asking him whether the lack of funds could derail the process of democracy in Zimbabwe.
I think Zimbabwe is not having the healthy financial situation to be able to hold its own elections in a sovereign way at its own time. And in fact, to follow up with that, himself and the Minister of Justice then went on to the UNDP to actually seek or ask for money to host a referendum in national elections. The trouble is looking for money when the date for referendum is 16 March and the date for national elections is in July. I'm not sure that the UNDP or any other person will be able to have that kind of money within that shortest possible time. So there's a financing problem for the national elections. The second one is the readiness of institutions that are actually supposed to discharge the elections. With resignations taking place in key institutions in the last couple of days, we need to have new chairpersons on board, and those have to be discharged with the functions of governance institutions that are in charge of elections. And I don't think that there's enough time to have a credible election that is not going to be contested and so on.
Of course, the key players in the election, ZANU-PF and MDC, have positioned in such a way that one gets the impression that ZANU is very keen to have the election, and the MDC is a lot more reticent, believing that key building blocks are not in place. If one were to look at the situation as it stands, can that referendum be held, given what we've just been told about the lack of funds, and of course also just the credibility of the elections around, these resignations?
Yeah, it looks like this referendum will take place. There's a commitment, at least from the political parties. They've also narrowed their differences around the new constitution, and they're actually going out, all of them, asking for a yes vote. And I don't think that there's going to be sufficient contestation coming from the no vote side to be able to change the outcome. So we're going to have a new constitution after the referendum. What remains a problem for me is the environment that is in place in the run-up to the elections. Do people have enough freedom of movement? Is civil society operating, engaging in voter education, civic education? Do we have access to media? All parties that are involved. Is the ZRP, the police, not deploying selective approaches to arresting people for all kinds of crimes that are usually associated with the pre-election environment? Do we have enough observers from SADC and the African Union ahead of time? And are the governance institutions, the Zimbabwe Election Commission, ready with a decent voters roll, with everyone that needs to be there on there? Have they resolved the issues of the diaspora vote and so on? These questions to me are still up in the air and don't give confidence to the election process. Although the election is something that both ZANU-PF and MDC want to have. Nobody wants to be in the government of national unity, it appears to me. The marriage is not very happy one. I think there's abuse going on in there. So I think they want to have elections and become a government with one party in charge.
Mm-hmm. Now, the idea that key institutions aren't ready, that the police and the security services are still acting in a partisan way, to what extent will that impact the fundamental legitimacy of an election that needs to be held this year? And are we likely to see any kind of postponement from where we're standing right now?
There's not been evidence of postponement of the election date. It looks to me that they want to go with this election date. There's been a case filed in the courts by the National Constitutional Assembly arguing that it's not enough between now and 3 weeks from now to have a referendum. So they filed a case in respect of the referendum date, arguing we need to educate people so that people vote in an informed way. But it looks like there is a political determination and commitment to have this election now. There's also a big UN conference that's taking place around tourism around October, and it looks to me that all parties contesting the election want to be involved at that time to stand in front and welcome the world as one president without a government of national unity. I think that there is still complaints about certain sections and units of the MDC about fundamental environmental questions related to freeness and fairness. But that is not enough to dissuade them from saying we are going to participate in the vote. It looks to me that every political party is saying we are ready to win
Now, of course, in Africa, the word substantially free and fair was added to free and fair to kind of almost grade or rate the environment in which the elections take place. Given the scenario that you have sketched, will we have substantially free and fair elections?
I don't know. I will only be able to say after the elections. But what's important is that we must put in place measures that will secure the secrecy of the vote, the security of the voter, and the credibility of the election announcement process. Once these things have been done, there's another fundamental issue that arose in 2008, which needs to be taken care of by SADC and those that are involved in mediation, which is the transfer of power in the event that the incumbency loses. I think that it's not clear in Zimbabwe as it is in other countries that on day one, you will have an election, on day two, a new president will come in place. It's not clear to me that there are mechanisms for transferring power from the sitting government to any other government. The party in government, although there are two, the party in government, which is ZANU-PF, has been in power since 1980. There's never been a moment where power shift has taken place. And those mechanisms did not clarify themselves in 2008. Part of the delays in announcing election results was rumored to be the question of how do you actually transfer power. So that needs to be a focus of the attention. Then the post-election environment, the security of voters in the post-election environment, the security of the vote itself, and the result. These things must not be privatized by entities other than those that are discharged constitutionally to run elections. A silver lining in this whole thing is that we've got a new constitutional document in place. And if we play by the rules of the new constitutional document, even though it is not the most perfect document, it will secure certain aspects of things that have been problematic in the election process in Zimbabwe historically. Now,
one of the key institutions in Zimbabwe is, of course, the military. And there's a lot of concern as to whether the military will, in fact, provide, that security and won't act in a partisan way. But more importantly, whether it will shift loyalties if the outcome of the vote is such that President Robert Mugabe, whose birthday it is today, is, in fact, voted out of power. From where you're sitting, Mr. Muchena, is the military in Zimbabwe ready for a government other than ZANU-PF?
Well, from pronouncements of the military elites at the top, you would think that there is no readiness. But the military in Zimbabwe and in Africa is not made up of generals. It's made up of the rank and file. And one needs to examine whether the rank and file actually relate with the statements that have been put in the media that we are not ready to salute anyone other than a leader with liberation credentials, whatever that means. The reality of the matter is that Zimbabwe is a constitutional democracy, and there is no place for the military in politics. If you want to be in politics, you remove your uniform, you run for a seat in parliament, and you go into parliament and you become a politician. While you are in uniform, you are governed by the constitution, which is to respect a civilian government that has been democratically elected. And I think these are the ethos that need to be respected and promoted. The issue of whether a general is comfortable with a person, this one or that one, is really not a matter of constitutional principle.
Let's, final question, Mr. Muchena. ZANU-PF has always been knocked as having, lost credibility, having lost much of its shine as a former liberation movement. It's been associated with, violent land grabs, with, suppressing political opposition. But we've seen subsequently that there has been some significant gains off the back of that land redistribution. We see businesses returning to Zimbabwe. If you were to be a Sangoma and look ahead, is ZANU going to do as badly as people predict, or is it in fact going to give the MDC a run for its money, considering that the MDC has been involved in some serious scandals related to corruption during its very short period in the government of national unity?
Yeah, well, anyone, including Sangomas, who would like to wish ZANU-PF away will be doing themselves and their trade a disservice, because the reality of the matter is that it is a long time since 2000 for any party to recover lost ground, renew its the potence of its message, and reform in some respects, including consolidating. You've got a lot of factions and divisions in ZANU-PF, but in the face of a common enemy, they tend to unite amongst themselves. And so they've deployed every election period a particular strategy. Right now, it's about indigenization and empowerment deals economically through ensuring that shares are given to all Zimbabweans. Although if you look at who gets it, it's another story. But those things do matter to some people, including the land question. There were people who got some pieces of land who will defend the issue and the position of ZANU-PF. So I think it has recovered some ground that it lost since 2000. Not enough ground for them to be able to say we will march to State House in the next election. So each of the parties will give each other a run for their money. Talking about, you were talking about money coming back into the system. Yes, after the National Government of National Unity was inaugurated, there was a lot of investor confidence that sort of shot up. If you look at figures, 2012, 2011, Zimbabwe's investment totals from the Zimbabwe investment centers was sitting at 6.6 billion, but it drastically went down last year to about 933 million. So there's a combination of investor confidence that come after stability and reforms have been generated. And when there are reversals, investors tend to fly away. But there's a lot of capital that is still flying into Zimbabwe. So we mustn't talk too much about the timidity of capital, because there are resources in Zimbabwe, there are business opportunities. South African corporates are getting in there, international groups are also getting in there.